Chapter 1. The Outcast of Xiphos 4. Zara had never felt truly seen in her life. Born on the distant planet Xiphos 4, a world that was both magnificent and indifferent, she had once been like any other member of her species. Xiphos 4 was known for its crystal forest that stretched as far as the eye could see, where the trees were made of translucent mineral deposits that shimmered under the twin suns of the planet. The oceans were no less enchanting, glowing with bioluminescent life that thrived beneath the surface, casting an ethereal light that filled the deep waters with shades of violet, blue, and emerald. Yet, despite the grandeur of her home planet, Zara never truly felt like she belonged in the world she was born into. Among her people, who were known for their elegance, agility, and grace, Zara had always been different and outcast in her own skin, trapped in a body that betrayed her. From a young age, it became apparent that Zara was unlike the others. Her legs, though functional, were shorter than what was considered normal for the Xiphians, a race of tall and slender beings whose bodies were perfectly built for movement and grace. While her peers sprinted through the crystal forests, climbing the tallest trees with ease, Zara stumbled behind them, her steps slower, more hesitant. Her physical condition was not catastrophic. She could walk and even run, but her movements were awkward and unbalanced, as though her body couldn't quite keep up with her mind. The longer Zara lived among her people, the more she realized that she would never be able to match their speed, their grace. She was a constant reminder to herself of her limitations, her body's refusal to conform to the standard of excellence that her society so valued. As she grew older, the rejection started to settle in. It wasn't overt or cruel. The Xiphians, though they valued their perfection, were not malicious. But Zara could feel their eyes on her. She could see the way they would look at her when she stumbled or struggled to reach the higher branches of the trees. They never outright mocked her, but she could sense their discomfort, the silent judgment that lingered when they compared her to the others. Zara's disability, though subtle, was impossible to ignore, and it made her a constant reminder of what she wasn't, what she could never be. Her legs, though they could carry her, would never allow her to be one of them. And in a society where physical prowess was the very measure of value, Zara knew she was nothing more than an afterthought, a misfit among the elite. The worst part was that Zara didn't hate her disability. She had learned to live with it, to make do with the reality of her condition. What she hated more than anything was the way others saw her, the way they saw her and pitied her. She didn't want their pity. She didn't need it. She wanted to be accepted, to be part of something greater than her own limitations. She wanted to belong. But no matter how hard she tried, she always felt like an outsider, looking in at a world that would never be hers. Zara had come to accept that the Xiphians were a race of perfection, and she, with her flawed body, would never measure up to their standards. There were no places for someone like her. She was an anomaly. It was on a bright morning, as Zara wandered through the crystal forests on the outskirts of her village, that she first saw him. He was an outsider, a human and alien to the world she had known. Zara had heard stories about humans, of course, but the accounts had always been told in whispers, filled with skepticism and awe. Humans were known to be strange, unpredictable, and unlike any other race in the galaxy. They came from a distant planet called Earth, and despite their physical frailty compared to the Xiphians, they had earned a reputation for resilience, creativity, and determination. At first, Zara thought she was imagining it. She had been walking alone, lost in her thoughts, when she noticed a figure in the distance, a tall, broad-shouldered figure moving between the glowing trees. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The figure wasn't like the others. His skin was pale, his hair dark and thick, and his dark eyes shone with curiosity as he looked at the flora surrounding him. His presence was both foreign and oddly comforting, like a piece of something she could never quite grasp. Zara's heart fluttered in her chest as she stared at him from afar, a strange sense of longing filling her. She had never seen a human before, and yet, there was something about him that seemed to speak to a part of her she had long buried in unspoken understanding, a silent invitation to something more. The human didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on examining the trees, touching the crystal-like bark with his hands, marveling at the way the light reflected off its surface. Zara's curiosity piqued, and for a moment, she debated whether or not she should approach him. She had always been taught to keep her distance from outsiders, to avoid drawing attention to herself, but something inside her rebelled. There was a pull, an urge to speak with him, to find out why he had come to Xiphos 4. She had heard that humans were explorers, curious about the worlds they encountered. Perhaps, she thought, he might offer her something her own people couldn't escape from the loneliness, the judgment, the sense of being less than. With tentative steps, Zara began to walk toward him, her legs feeling heavier than usual, the weight of her insecurities pressing against her chest. As she drew closer, the human finally turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, a quiet space where words hadn't yet intruded. He studied her with an expression that was neither surprised nor dismissive, just curious. His gaze lingered for a moment longer than she expected, and Zara felt a strange warmth spread through her. It was as if, for the first time, someone truly saw her not as a defective Xiphian, not as an outcast, but simply as herself. "Hello," the human said, his voice deep but gentle, the tone unguarded. His accent was unfamiliar, but his words were clear, his language surprisingly fluent. "You're from here, aren't you?" Xiphos 4. Zara nodded, her throat tight. She hadn't expected to speak so soon, let alone in a voice that trembled with the uncertainty she had carried for so long. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice soft. "I live near the forest. I'm a resident of this world." The human smiled. It was a small, kind smile, nothing special, but it felt like a bridge being built between them. "It's beautiful here," he said, gesturing to the glowing trees. "I've never seen anything like it. It's peaceful." Zara's gaze shifted toward the forest, her heart still pounding in her chest. "Yes, it is peaceful," she agreed, but there was a sadness in her voice that she couldn't quite hide. She looked at him, then looked away. "It's peaceful, if you belong here." The human raised an eyebrow, curiosity flaring in his expression. "What do you mean?" Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had never spoken about her feelings of isolation to anyone before. It was too painful, too raw. But something in the human's presence made her feel as though she could trust him, as though he wouldn't judge her. I don't fit in here," she said quietly. "I am different from the others. I can't move the way they do, the way they expect us to move. My legs, they don't work like everyone else's. I was born this way. And so, I'm an outcast." The human's expression softened, and for the first time, Zara saw a flicker of empathy in his eyes. A look that wasn't born from pity, but from understanding. "I don't think being different is a bad thing," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "Everyone has their own story, their own struggles. You're not alone." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, uncertain if she had heard him right. The words didn't make sense in the context of her life. No one had ever said anything like that to her. It was a foreign concept, one that she had never allowed herself to believe. For so long, she had thought that being different was something to hide, something to be ashamed of, something that made her less than everyone else. But here was this human, this stranger from a distant world, telling her that being different didn't make her less. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she felt tears well up in her eyes, the first tears of release she had allowed herself in years. She had never let herself cry in front of others, but the moment felt like a breakthrough, a moment when the weight of her years of solitude, of feeling rejected and unseen, was finally beginning to lift. The human, noticing her tears, stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "I'm here with you." In that moment, Zara realized something profound. It wasn't that she needed someone to fix her or to erase her differences. She didn't need anyone to make her perfect. She just needed someone who would see her for who she was and still choose to stay. And for the first time in her life, someone had chosen to stay. And that, Zara thought, was the beginning of something entirely new. Zara stood in stunned silence, her breath shallow as she tried to process what had just happened. It was as if a lifetime of isolation and rejection had collided with this moment, leaving her dazed and unsure of what to do next. The human, whose name she hadn't yet learned, had said something that felt impossibly kind. He had seen her, truly seen her. For a moment, it felt as though the walls that had built up around her heart were beginning to crumble, their cracks allowing the light of possibility to seep through. No longer did she feel the crushing weight of being an outcast, of being imperfect in a world that demanded nothing less than flawless beauty and movement. Instead, there was the faintest spark of hope, something she had long buried deep within herself. The human was still standing in front of her, his gaze steady, though there was no judgment in his eyes. There was only quiet understanding, A patient acceptance that made Zara feel for the first time in her life that her worth was not tied to her physical limitations. She had grown used to people glancing at her with pity, with discomfort, as though she were something to be avoided, a tragic figure whose flaws made her undeserving of attention. But this stranger didn't pity her. He didn't see her as something to be fixed or discarded. He simply accepted her for who she was. It was a strange sensation, one that stirred something within her chest, something fragile, yet incredibly powerful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Zara fought to find the words to express what she was feeling, to explain the overwhelming tide of emotion that was building up inside her. She had spent so many years keeping her true thoughts locked away, terrified of what would happen if she let herself feel too much. But now, with this human standing before her, it felt as if the dam was finally breaking. She could feel the rawness of her emotions rising, threatening to spill over, and she knew that if she didn't say something, she might just lose control of the fragile thread of connection they had started to form. I don't know what to say, Zara finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. No one's ever said that to me before. I've always been told that I need to change, that I'm not enough as I am. Her voice faltered, and she looked away, the shame of her past creeping back in. But you make it sound like I don't have to be anything more than myself. The human's expression softened, and he took a step closer, his voice calm and reassuring. You don't need to change, Zara. Not for anyone. Not for me. You're more than enough, just as you are. His words hung in the air, a simple but profound declaration that seemed to break through the years of internalized rejection she had carried. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she met his gaze again, her breath catching in her throat. The warmth in his eyes was like a balm to her wounded spirit, soothing the raw edges of her self-doubt. She couldn't help but feel the weight of his sincerity, the quiet strength behind his words. But I'm different, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of wonder and fear. How could you possibly want to be around someone like me? The human smiled, the expression gentle and understanding. Being different isn't a bad thing, Zara. It's what makes you unique. And I don't think anyone who truly sees you would ever want you to change that. He paused, then added, and I want to be around you, not because you're perfect, but because of who you are, your heart, your strength, the way you keep going even when it's hard. Zara felt a lump form in her throat as his words sunk in. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her own worth, not based on what others thought of her, but simply for the fact that she existed. She wasn't an accident, a flaw, or a mistake. She was Zara, someone who deserved love, compassion, and acceptance just as much as anyone else. And it was in that moment, standing there among the crystal trees of HFY 4, that Zara realized something truly incredible. The human had given her something she had never had before. He had given her the courage to believe in herself. And in doing so, he had unlocked something inside of her, something she had buried so deep for fear of it never being returned. I don't know what the future holds, Zara whispered, her voice barely audible. But I want to try. I want to try to believe that I can be more than what I thought I was. The human smiled again, this time with more warmth, his eyes shining with a quiet resolve. You don't have to try to be anything, Zara. You already are everything you need to be. And as for the future, I'll be here, right beside you. Together, we'll face whatever comes next. For the first time in her life, Zara didn't feel the cold grip of loneliness. Instead, she felt the warmth of connection, the comfort of knowing that someone had chosen to see her, to accept her. She wasn't alone anymore. And with that realization, something inside her shifted, a sense of hope, a glimmer of possibility that had once seemed out of reach. The forest around them seemed to breathe with a new energy, its bioluminescent flora glowing brighter, as if acknowledging the shift in the air. Zara took a deep breath, the weight in her chest lightening with every passing second. This was just the beginning, she knew. But for the first time in years, she was ready to take the first step towards something better. Chapter 2. The journey begins. The days that followed Zara's encounter with the human whose name, as it turned out, was Ethan felt like a strange new chapter in her life, one that she had never expected to open. What had started as a fleeting moment of connection in the crystal forest had quickly blossomed into something deeper, more profound. Ethan, though still a stranger to her in many ways, had become a constant presence, and Zara found herself eagerly looking forward to the moments they shared. Ethan had made it clear from the start that he wasn't here to change her or fix her. He simply wanted to walk beside her as she navigated her world. It was a simple offer, but one that felt as though it carried the weight of a promise. He had shown her that she didn't need to change, that her worth wasn't determined by her physical abilities or the judgment of others. For the first time, Zara felt free from the shackles of self-doubt, the invisible chains that had bound her to the belief that she was incomplete. The pair spent more time together, exploring the wonders of Xiphos 4. Zara had always been familiar with the forests and the oceans of her home planet, but seeing them through Ethan's eyes brought a new sense of wonder and awe. The way he marveled at the bioluminescent flora, the excitement in his voice when he encountered a new species, the sheer joy in his laughter each moment made Zara realize just how much she had been missing out on by keeping to herself all these years. It wasn't just about the beauty of Xiphos 4 anymore. It was about really living, experiencing life with someone who understood her and accepted her without reservation. Ethan never once made her feel like she was less than anyone else. If anything, his presence made her feel stronger, as if she could conquer anything the universe had to offer, just as she was. But as the days passed, Zara began to realize that her bond with Ethan was becoming more than just friendship. The way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, and the way he made her feel, she couldn't deny that there was something more simmering beneath the surface. The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. She was falling in love with him. At first, she tried to ignore the growing feelings inside her, telling herself that it was simply a natural response to the connection they had forged. After all, she had been lonely for so long, and Ethan had been the first person in her life to treat her like an equal, to accept her for all that she was. But the more time she spent with him, the more she found herself thinking about him when he wasn't around. The more her heart raced whenever their hands brushed, whenever their eyes met with a shared understanding. Zara couldn't help but wonder if Ethan felt the same way. She had no idea what he thought about her beyond the friendship they had cultivated, and she feared that her feelings might complicate things. She wasn't the same as the others. She wasn't perfect, and that made her uncertain of what she could offer someone like him. The doubts crept in again, threatening to drown her newfound confidence. But she fought them back, telling herself that she deserved to be loved just as much as anyone else. It was on a quiet evening, as the twin suns set behind the distant mountains, that Zara finally found the courage to speak the words she had been holding in for so long. They were sitting on the edge of a glowing lake, watching the ripples dance across the water. The air was warm, and the sky was a soft mix of pinks and oranges. It was the perfect moment, and Zara knew that if she didn't say something now, she might never have the chance again. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his gaze soft and attentive. "Yes." Zara took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak her truth. I need to tell you something." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You can tell me anything, Zara." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. I think I'm falling in love with you." There was a brief pause, and for a moment, Zara's world seemed to freeze. She was terrified of what he might say, terrified that her feelings would ruin everything between them. But when Ethan spoke, his voice was warm and full of kindness. "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied, his smile genuine and wide. "Because I feel the same way." Zara's heart fluttered in her chest, and all the fear, all the uncertainty, melted away. In that moment, she realized that love wasn't about perfection, it was about connection, about being seen and understood for who you truly were. And in Ethan, she had found someone who not only saw her, but loved her, flaws and all. The journey they had started together was just beginning, and as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky above them, Zara knew that the future was no longer something she feared. It was something she was ready to face with Ethan by her side. With the weight of their confessions shared under the starlit sky, a new chapter unfolded before Zara and Ethan. The quiet peace of that moment, so filled with unspoken promises, began to blossom into something more tangible. For the first time in Zara's life, the future felt filled with possibilities, no longer defined by her physical limitations, but by the bond they had begun to build. She was no longer an outcast in her own home, and with Ethan beside her, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead with newfound strength and determination. Days passed, and Zara's life began to take on a rhythm she had never known before. Ethan, as curious as ever about the world around him, continued to explore Xiphos 4 with wide-eyed wonder. But now, he wasn't just an observer of the world. He was an active participant in it, alongside her. Whether it was collecting rare plant specimens, hiking through the forests, or learning the ways of her people, they did it all together, laughing and sharing in the experience. Zara could see the wonder in his eyes every time he saw something new, a new species of bird, the shimmering light of the crystal trees at dawn, or the breathtaking glow of the oceans at night. She found herself smiling more, her heart swelling with pride as she showed him the beauty of her planet. But there was more than just exploration happening between them. The connection they shared grew deeper each day, not just in friendship, but in trust, understanding, and the subtle, quiet moments where their hands brushed or their eyes met, full of unspoken longing. Zara, once so self-conscious about her condition, found herself no longer hiding it. Ethan never looked at her with pity or disgust. He didn't see her shorter legs or the way she moved differently from the others. He saw her as she was, a person who had depth, heart, and strength, someone worth knowing beyond appearances. With him, Zara felt free, for the first time in her life, to simply be herself, without fear or hesitation. She had always worried that her disability would make her unworthy of someone's love, but with Ethan, that fear dissipated. He saw her as she was and accepted her completely, flaws and all. But even as she embraced this newfound confidence, Zara couldn't help but feel the unease building deep within her chest. Her connection with Ethan was growing stronger each day, but so too were the uncertainties that followed. Her heart yearned for him, but she feared that their future together could be fleeting. He was human, and she was Ziphian, a species that was not only physically different, but culturally and biologically incompatible. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about human Ziphian relationships. They were not common, and many said they couldn't last. What if she, too, was just a fleeting moment for him, a distraction from his world, a beautiful yet temporary experience? These thoughts plagued her, especially in the quiet moments before sleep, when the reality of their differences became impossible to ignore. She didn't want to scare him away with her doubts, but she also couldn't suppress the nagging fear that one day, he would realize that his world and hers were too different to bridge. What if the human heart wasn't capable of holding someone like her in it forever? One afternoon, as they sat by the edge of the sparkling crystal lake, Zara watched Ethan in quiet contemplation. His face was serene, his fingers tracing the surface of the water as the sun dipped low in the sky. The air was warm, filled with the soothing sounds of the planet's creatures, and Zara couldn't help but marvel at how easy it had been to fall into this connection with him. He had come from a world so different from hers, and yet it felt like they had always been meant to find each other. She had always believed that she would remain an outsider, but now, with Ethan beside her, the world felt a little more connected, a little less lonely. "Ethan," she began, her voice hesitant, breaking the silence between them. He turned his gaze to her, a gentle smile on his lips. "Yeah." Zara's heart fluttered in her chest as she prepared herself to voice the doubts she had been keeping buried for so long. I need to ask you something. And please, be honest with me." Ethan's expression softened, sensing her unease. "Of course. You can ask me anything." Taking a deep breath, Zara looked him in the eyes. "What happens if we can't make this work? If our worlds are too different? What if this connection we have is just a moment, something fleeting?" Ethan's smile faltered for a moment, his brow furrowing as he leaned in closer. "Zara, I won't lie to you. I know that our worlds are different, and yes, there are challenges ahead. But I don't see you as a moment, something temporary. I see you as someone I want to share my life with, someone who makes me feel more alive, more connected to the world than I ever have before. You're not a fleeting thing to me." Zara swallowed the lump in her throat, feeling her pulse quicken. "But, Ethan, you're human. You'll want things I can't give you. You'll want someone who's the same as you. Someone who can fit in your world." Ethan shook his head, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I don't need someone to be just like me. I need someone who's real, who challenges me, who makes me feel like I'm part of something greater. And Zara, you've done that. You've made me see the universe in a way I never thought possible. You make me better. I want to be with you, for however long that is." His words were like a balm to her worried soul, and Zara felt the tension in her chest release, if only for a moment. She wanted to believe him, to believe that their connection could survive whatever differences they faced. She wanted to trust that love wasn't about being the same, but about accepting each other in all their complexities, their flaws, and their strengths. "I'm scared, Ethan," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I've never felt this way about anyone, and I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to try." Ethan gently lifted her chin, bringing her gaze back to his. "Then let's try together, Zara. Whatever comes, we face it together. I promise." And in that moment, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Zara knew that she was no longer alone. Chapter 3. The Choice That Changes Everything. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences, growth, and, most importantly, the deepening of Zara and Ethan's bond. Their connection became the foundation upon which they built their shared moments, navigating the complexities of their differences while embracing the beauty that lay in those differences. Together, they explored the forests of Xiphos 4, swam in the glowing oceans, and reveled in the quiet moments that felt like they could stretch on forever. But as their love for each other blossomed, so too did the undeniable reality of the challenges they would have to face. Zara's fears, though softened by Ethan's reassuring words, still lingered. She knew that their relationship was an anomaly, that the two of them were pushing the boundaries of what their worlds could accept. Ethan, despite his deep affection for Zara, had his own struggles to contend with. He had a life on Earth, a world that was far away and vastly different from Xiphos 4. He was a visitor on this planet, and there was no telling how long he would stay. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zara and Ethan found themselves seated by the same crystal lake where they had first talked openly about their fears. The calm waters reflected the colors of the setting sun, casting a soft, peaceful light across the landscape. But this time, there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that neither of them could ignore. "Ethan," Zara began, her voice shaky, "I know you didn't come here to stay forever. Your mission, your home, it's on Earth. And I can't ask you to stay with me here if you don't want to. But I just need to know, before we go any further, what do you want?" Ethan looked at her, his gaze intense, but filled with something that felt like an unbreakable resolve. "What I want is to be with you, Zara. You've shown me a world that's full of beauty and life, and I can't imagine leaving that behind. But I'm not going to ask you to follow me to Earth if that's not what you want. I don't want you to feel like you have to give up your home, your life, for me." Zara's heart ached as she listened to his words. She knew the decision they were facing was a difficult one, a decision that would change the course of both of their lives and potentially tear them apart. But she couldn't live in the uncertainty any longer. She had to make a choice that would define her future just as much as it would define theirs. "I want to be with you, Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with a newfound clarity. "No matter where we go, Earth, Xiphos 4, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're together. But I need to know that no matter the distance, no matter the time, we're both willing to face whatever comes." Ethan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We will. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, no matter where we are." And in that moment, Zara knew that no matter where their journey took them, they would never be alone. The bond they shared was stronger than the distance between their worlds, stronger than the differences that separated them. It was a bond forged in love, trust, and the unwavering belief that they belonged together. And so, they chose to face the future, hand in hand, ready for whatever challenges it might bring. In the weeks following their heart-to-heart by the Crystal Lake, Zara and Ethan found a new rhythm, a deeper understanding of what it meant to build a future together. The uncertainty that once clouded their every interaction had dissipated somewhat, replaced by a quiet resolve to face whatever came next. Yet, as their connection deepened, the questions of their future began to loom larger. Zara knew that the decision they had made, to pursue a relationship despite the vast differences in their worlds, would have consequences. Ethan was a human, and she was a Xiphian. Their worlds were so different, and their biology incompatible in ways neither of them had fully understood. Could love truly bridge that divide? Zara's thoughts were often consumed by these questions, especially as she watched Ethan adjust to the rhythms of Xiphos 4. The planet was breathtaking, and Ethan's enthusiasm for it had been infectious. He reveled in everything he encountered, from the glowing forests to the endless expanse of bioluminescent oceans. But while Ethan found wonder in all that Xiphos 4 had to offer, Zara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that, deep down, he missed his own world, his family, his friends, the life he had left behind. Despite the happiness that had bloomed between them, She couldn't ignore the pull of Earth, the place he truly belonged. One evening, as they stood together watching the stars from the top of a ridge overlooking the forest, Zara turned to him with a question that had been growing in her heart. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can see how much you love this planet. And I know that you're here for a reason, a mission. But when it's over, when your time here comes to an end, what happens to us?" Ethan looked at her, his face thoughtful, the weight of her words settling between them. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've thought about it a lot. I'm here on a temporary assignment, and that's the truth. But I'm not going to lie to you, Zara. I'm already starting to think of Xiphos for as more than just a place. It's a part of my life now." "And you dash," he paused, taking her hand in his, looking deep into her eyes. "You're a part of that too." Zara's heart fluttered, but doubt still crept into her thoughts. "But you can't stay forever. I don't want you to feel trapped here, Ethan. I know Earth is your home. I know it's where your future lies." Ethan's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her. "I can't say what will happen after this mission ends, Zara. I really can't. But what I do know is that my time here, with you, has changed me. This world, this life, has changed everything I thought I knew about my own future." He let out a breath, as if struggling with the words he wanted to say. "Maybe Earth isn't where my heart belongs anymore." The weight of his words settled between them, and for the first time, Zara allowed herself to believe in something that had once seemed impossible, that love, no matter how improbable, might just be enough to hold them together. She was no longer living in the shadow of fear that their differences would tear them apart. They had made it through so much already, and each day felt like another affirmation of their bond. But still, the question of their future loomed large. Zara had come to terms with her own identity, her own place in the world, but could she really ask Ethan to abandon everything for her? She wanted him to be free to follow his heart, no matter the distance. She didn't want him to feel obligated to stay with her out of a sense of duty or guilt. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I just want you to know that I don't want you to stay with me because you think you have to. I want you to choose it because it's what you truly want." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I want you to have the life you've dreamed of. If that's not here, then I'll let you go. I'll always want what's best for you." Ethan gazed at her, his hand gently cupping her cheek, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the breeze and the distant hum of the planet's life around them. Then he spoke, his voice steady, determined. "I've thought about everything you've said, Zara, and I've come to a conclusion that feels right." He paused, searching her eyes for the answer he hoped to find there. "I don't want to go back to Earth. I don't want to go back to a life that doesn't feel like it has meaning anymore. My heart is here, with you, with Xiphos 4. The mission was never just about exploring a planet. It was about finding something that matters. And that something is you." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as she felt her heart leap in her chest. His words were the final reassurance she needed. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The fear that had clouded her mind for so long about distance, about differences, had dissipated in the face of his honesty, his love. She had spent so many years convinced that she would never belong, that she would always be alone, that her differences made her unworthy of a love like this. But now, with Ethan by her side, Zara knew that love had a way of overcoming even the most impossible of odds. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart filled with hope. Ethan smiled, the warmth in his eyes melting any lingering doubt. "I'm sure. With you, Zara, I found what I've been searching for. And I want to be here, with you, for as long as you'll have me." They stood there, holding each other, the stars above them like silent witnesses to the beginning of something new, something beautiful, a future that, despite the odds, was theirs to shape. Chapter 4. A Future Together. The days that followed felt like a dream, a beautiful, surreal experience, where Zara and Ethan carved out a life together on Xiphos 4. They continued to explore the planet, discovering hidden wonders and marveling at the natural beauty that surrounded them. But their lives were no longer defined solely by adventure and exploration. Together, they built something deeper, a home in the truest sense of the word, where their differences no longer felt like obstacles, but the very foundation of their connection. Zara had always believed that her disability was something that defined her, something that set her apart from others. But with Ethan, she realized that it was just a small part of who she was, a part that didn't limit her, but added to her strength. Ethan never once saw her legs as something that made her any less capable. He saw her as whole, as a person with her own dreams, her own desires, and a strength that went far beyond her physical appearance. They began to share more than just their love for the planet. Ethan, in his quiet, patient way, taught Zara about Earth, its history, its people, the music and art that had shaped human culture. In turn, Zara introduced him to her own world, Ziphian literature, art, and music, rich in symbolism and beauty. Each day felt like a lesson, not just in survival or exploration, but in understanding each other's histories, cultures, and perspectives. They became partners in every sense of the word, learning from one another, challenging each other, and growing together in ways neither had imagined before. But even as they found their rhythm, the world outside continued to turn, and they knew that their future was never guaranteed. Zara couldn't deny the reality that eventually, Ethan would need to return to Earth. His mission, though it had been completed, still had implications for his future. Yet, she no longer feared that departure. With every day they spent together, they were not just building memories. They were building a foundation for something stronger than distance. Months passed, and the time came for Ethan to make his choice. Zara, standing by the edge of the glowing ocean, watched as he approached her, his face serious but filled with the warmth of their shared love. She knew the decision would be difficult, and though she wanted him to stay, she also wanted him to be free to live his own life, his own dreams. The bond they had shared had given her strength, and now, it was time to let him decide. Ethan stopped in front of her, his eyes locked with hers. He took her hands in his, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Zara," he began, his voice full of certainty, "I've made my decision. I'm staying here, with you. This is where I belong now. With you." Tears of joy filled Zara's eyes as she realized that the journey they had started together wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a lifelong commitment, one that would shape both of their futures. Together, they would build a life on Xiphos 4, creating something new from the love that had blossomed between them. The challenges they faced, cultural, physical, or otherwise, were no longer obstacles to their happiness, but opportunities to grow stronger together. As the twin suns set over the horizon, Zara and Ethan stood side by side, looking out at the planet they had come to call home, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. They were no longer outcasts, no longer defined by their differences. They were simply two souls, connected by a love that transcended everything else. The future, they knew, was theirs to shape together. As time passed, Zara and Ethan settled into their new life, each day strengthening their bond in ways they hadn't expected. Zara, who had spent so many years feeling isolated and uncertain, now found herself wrapped in a quiet, unspoken joy that came with being truly seen, accepted, and loved for who she was. The fears that once plagued her heart began to melt away with each passing day spent with Ethan. There was no longer any need to prove herself, to hide behind the facade of perfection. She was enough. He loved her for who she was, her strengths, her imperfections, and all the in-between moments that made her unique. They continued to explore the wonders of Xiphos 4, each discovery marking a milestone in their journey together. But what truly made their day special was not just the physical beauty of the planet they had come to call home, but the beauty of their partnership. They built a life from scratch, weaving together their hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities into a tapestry of shared experiences that transcended the borders of culture, species, and expectation. Zara had once believed that her disability was the one thing that would always separate her from others, especially someone like Ethan, who was human, someone who could walk across any terrain with ease, never struggling with the limitations that she had to constantly face. But what she had realized was that love wasn't about perfection, it was about acceptance, trust, and mutual respect. Ethan had never once seen her legs as a hindrance. He had never made her feel as though she was anything less than whole. And in return, Zara gave him her heart in a way she never thought possible. She shared her world with him, Xiphos 4's culture, its history, its beauty, and together, they forged something entirely their own. However, as the seasons on Xiphos 4 changed, so did the reality of their lives. Zara's confidence in herself had grown, but she could not ignore the undeniable truth. Ethan was human. His time on Xiphos 4 had been temporary, a mission that would one day come to an end. There was no denying that Earth, his home planet, called to him in a way that Xiphos 4 could not. There were family, friends, responsibilities awaiting him back home, and Zara knew that the time would eventually come for him to return. But what she had once feared, his eventual departure, was no longer something she dreaded. Their time together had been more than a dream. It had been a beautiful reality, one they had shaped with their love. She had learned to live without fear of what would come next. And when the time came for Ethan to make the difficult choice, they would face it together. But for now, in this moment, they would not think of the future as something inevitable. They would live fully in the present. One evening, as they stood together at the edge of the glowing ocean, watching the stars twinkle in the sky above, Ethan turned to Zara, his expression serious but filled with something profound. "Zara," he began softly, "I've thought a lot about the future, about what comes next for both of us. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. My mission here on HFY 4, it's over, and I know that my path is taking me back to Earth. But when I think about where I truly belong, I don't feel the pull of my old life there. I feel the pull of you, of HFY 4. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was saying. The time had come for them to make a choice, not based on what they feared, but on what they truly wanted. And Ethan had made his choice. He continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've decided to stay here. I want to be with you, Zara. I want to build a future with you, here, on HFY 4. Earth is my home, but you, this world, this life with you, this is where I belong. This is where I want to be." Tears welled up in Zara's eyes as she gazed at him, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite put into words. She had always feared that their love would be fleeting, that their differences would ultimately tear them apart. But in this moment, she knew the truth. Love wasn't something bound by time or space. Love was about choosing each other every single day, no matter the obstacles, no matter the unknowns. "I want that too, Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth and certainty. "I want to build a life with you, and I want to do it here, together." As the twin moons of HFY 4 rose high above them, casting a soft glow over the landscape, they stood hand in hand, a quiet promise passing between them. They had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered. The future, whatever it may hold, was theirs to shape. From that day forward, Zara and Ethan lived their lives together on HFY 4, building a life filled with love, adventure, and an unshakable bond that no force in the universe could break. The differences that had once seemed insurmountable faded into the background, replaced by the strength they had found in each other. They discovered new wonders of HFY 4, worked to improve the planet's future, and, most importantly, faced the challenges of their relationship not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow even closer. And as the years passed, Zara knew that love, in all its forms, was never about perfection. It was about accepting each other completely, embracing the parts that made them different, and finding strength in their shared connection. With Ethan by her side, Zara had found the courage to believe in herself, in their love, and in the future they would build together one step at a time.